Hi, everyone. I am Rhea Reeves, your host. Welcome to the Breaking Through Your Budgeting Barriers webinar. I'm so excited to walk you through fears and misconceptions that most people have when it comes to budgeting so you can break free and really make financial success yours. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So, breaking through your budgeting barriers, how you can get over your negative mindset towards budgeting, understand how simple budgeting can be, and really make your next budget a success. I am your host, Rhea Reeves. I am the founder of City Girl Savings, and I'll get into a little bit more about myself and my passion for finance a little later in the webinar. But you are in the right place if when you hear the word budget, you just cringe automatically and you assume you can't enjoy your life, or maybe you think it's too hard to budget and a budget will never work for your situation. If you think that or have those negative associations with the word budget, you're in the right place, and I hope to break you free of that. You are also in the right place if you have been trying to budget for years with no success. For some reason, the numbers just never add up or even out, and ultimately it forces you to give up. If any of those situations have happened to you with your past budgets, you're in the right place, and I'll walk you through what it really takes for your budget to be successful. Now, you are also in the right place if you think your situation just doesn't allow for you to budget properly. You don't make enough money, or you have too much debt, or you think your situation is under control. If any of those apply to you, you are in the right place. But before we get into breaking through your budgeting barriers, I want to share with you really quickly who I am. My name is Rhea Reeves, as I mentioned, and I am the founder of City Girl Savings. I started City Girl Savings in 2015, ultimately as a resource for women to come learn about finance, get on financial track, really learn what it takes to master their financial situation regardless of what it looks like. Since City Girl Savings launched in 2015, I've written hundreds of articles around mastering your money. I have provided budget plans to over hundreds of women. I provide one-on-one coaching to really help women pinpoint where their spending is going wrong, where their finances are going wrong, and really work to fix them. A little bit more about me. I live in Austin, Texas. I was born and raised here, but I spent 7 years in Los Angeles, California, where I obtained my degree in finance from Cal State University. You can see the picture here is me in Cape Town, South Africa for my birthday last year. I just love to travel and explore and experience new things. And I've always had that in me, but I never until lately mastered how to do that and still have money in your bank account. For any of you who know me, you know that when I was in college, I lived life to the fullest, and even though I studied finance, I really didn't master managing my own money. And it wasn't till I moved back to Austin after my father died that it really hit me that you do have to take care of your own personal situation. And when you can do that, you can do anything you want. You'll also see pictured here my two little Yorkie pups, Toby and Milo, very sweet boys. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but ultimately, I teach women and a few men here and there how to pinpoint their money opportunities, how to live life on a realistic budget that works for their situation, and ultimately how to align their spending to that budget so they can reach their goals. If you can master budgeting specifically for your situation, then managing your spending to ensure you're following that budget, you really can do whatever you want to do. one thing I want to stress, and I kind of talked to this a little bit, but my journey was not overnight. I had a good financial upbringing. Both of my parents worked very hard. My father was a successful business owner, started from zero, made a multi-million-dollar company, all from hard work. And so I learned the value of working hard, and when you do that, you are rewarded in financial terms or personal success terms. So I had a very good, solid background when it came to finance and growing up in my household in Austin, Texas. When I turned 18, automatically moved to Los Angeles, and I don't want to say that I lost all of that good financial upbringing, but it was a lot easier to overspend in a big city like LA with no parental supervision to stop me. So I definitely went a little spend happy. I got my first credit card while I was out there, and while my limit wasn't very high, I still maxed it out. So I learned a lot through personal experience, and I also learned a few years later that while you may have messed your finances up, you can turn it around. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But as I mentioned, when I lived out there and went to school, I majored in finance. So I was studying everything I needed to know about finance and investing, but my own actions weren't living up to what I was learning. Living in Los Angeles, or really any city for that matter, there are events and outings and exploration and shopping and friends and going out to eat and bars, and all of that leads to debt if you don't have money coming in, one, or two, you have much more money going out than you have coming in. And that was my situation. Eventually, I graduated with my degree in finance. I got a low-paying job right out of college, which was nice, but it really did not master up to living in Los Angeles and paying the incredibly high costs associated with living there. I was living paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes worse. I mentioned my father passed away, so 3 years after I graduated, my dad passed away in Austin, and I moved back home to be closer to my mom and brother. And, tragedy sparked change. It was a very, very tough time because I was very close to my dad, but I knew I had two options. I could go one path and really just spiral out of control and not care, but I knew my dad would not like that. He was a very supportive father figure to me, and I chose to go the other route and really make something of myself and prove that I could. Whether he's watching me or not, at least he would know and I would know that I could get my life together. So when I moved back home, it was nice. I moved in with mom, but I tell you, being 24 years old back with mom is humbling, to say the least. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get ahead. Living with my mom meant no rent, very minimal expenses, besides my own debt that I accrued through my years of exploring in LA. I really didn't have to spend my money on anything. Cheaper costs of living with increased income. So when I moved out to Austin, I had a work from home job, and since I had no money going out besides my debt, I was in a better position than I had ever been. Not to mention, Austin itself is a lot cheaper than Los Angeles. Another thing, I had no distractions around to encourage me to spend money. My boyfriend was out of state, so I really didn't get to see him much. My close friends were either in California, or the ones that I had from Austin were in other places because they no longer live there. So really it was just me, myself, and I, with nothing to do except make money, save money, and pay off my debts. Proud I am to say that I paid all of my debt off, which was over $15,000, and I saved $10,000 in about a year and a half, a little bit more than that. But that's an incredible amount of money to save and or put towards debt. And it just goes to show that if you can really control your spending, if you really can make the most of your situation through a very solid, detailed budget, you can get yourself out of any situation. And one thing I want to say is that City Girl Savings launched out of all of this. When I moved back to Austin and got my life together, I realized that I loved living in Los Angeles. I loved exploring. I love all the things that most women do love. But I also learned that managing your money is priceless and will open the door for you to do all of the things you want and still be secure. And that's how City Girl Savings came to be. I was a city girl living in Los Angeles who moved to Austin and saved her money. Therefore, City Girl Savings was launched. And I wanted to teach and show other women that it can be done. Just have to sacrifice and be disciplined, but it absolutely can be done. So one thing I want you to know is that a realistic budget, keyword realistic, and following that budget made it all possible for me. So if I didn't have a realistic budget, or if I wasn't honest about my situation, I wouldn't have been able to follow that budget, for one. But two, I also would have thrown it out the window and just figured it out along the way, which doesn't have to be the way to go. You can have a solid plan that's true to you. You follow it, you reach your goal. It's that simple. Okay, so let's talk about some shocking statistics about budgeting. Number one, 2/3 of Americans would struggle to cover a $1,000 emergency if it came up. So about 67% of the US population can't come up with $1,000 to cover an emergency without going into debt. How depressing is that? Next, 42% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, including, this is the crazy part, 25% of those earning more than $100,000 a year. So let's think about this for a second. Almost half the population is living paycheck to paycheck. I was one of those people when I lived in California. But 25% of them are making more than $100,000 a year. So what does this tell you? It tells you that it does not matter how much money you make. If you do not know how to control your spending and live life in a budget, you're gonna be living paycheck to paycheck. You will not be saving. You will have debt and continue to have debt. So if you think you don't make enough, or if you think you make enough and you'll figure it out later, you need to master what you have, and it is 100% possible. Next, 36% of Americans are not saving at all for retirement. Oh, this breaks my heart. You think, well, I can't even save for myself. How am I going to save for retirement? And all that is doing is making it harder and harder and harder on your future self. So when you create that realistic budget, you already need a small percentage of your paycheck going to retirement, because I tell you, nothing will be worse than turning 67, 65, whatever age you want to retire, and you not being able to because you never saved for it. And then lastly, the average American household with debt owes $132,000. And this includes all credit cards, mortgages, auto loans, student loans, and other types of debt. Are you in that average? What does your debt look like? Do you want to be one of these statistics? No, you don't. So if this doesn't encourage you to break through your budgeting barriers, you need to find something. Now, I want you to vow right here and now with me. I'm right here with you. Vow to change your statistic. And you know what? It all starts with the budget. All starts with a budget that is realistic for you. So before we can work on that realistic budget, we need to make sure your mindset is ready for it. So if you think any of these things, a budget means I can't have fun, or I don't make enough money to budget, or I have too much debt, a budget just won't work for me, or I never learned how to budget my money. If these 4 thoughts are your reasoning or excuse for not setting and following a budget, you've got to break through it. Get to the root of what this is. You know, instead of thinking these things, you need to think, my budget should include fun. I should be able to enjoy myself in moderation. I should be able to include that in my budget. You should think that a budget will help you manage what you have. So going back to that statistic, 25% of people living paycheck to paycheck make more than $100,000 a year. And that's because they don't know how to budget their money. They don't have a realistic budget that helps them. It doesn't matter how much you make. If you have a budget, you can manage what you have. A budget will help you get out of debt. So a budget will show you what you can reasonably afford to put towards debt on top of any minimum payments. Your budget will show you this. Your budget will show you what you can afford to put towards your debt so you can be debt-free. You absolutely need a budget to show you what you can do to get debt-free. And then you have to be willing to learn how to budget. So if you've been there, you've tried a budget, just didn't quite work, well, did you really do what it takes to follow that budget? Did you learn what it takes to create that realistic budget for your situation? And be honest with yourself. There's no judgment here. You know, I told you my story and where I was, and it wasn't pretty. But when I learned how to manage my money, thanks to no spending, a whole new world opened up. And that's what I want you to understand is change your mindset around the word budget. A budget is a great thing that can help you reach your goals. So mindset is everything when setting and following a budget. You want to make sure you have the right frame of mind to get started, because it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be overnight. But if you know that you are disciplined enough to follow your budget, you will reach your goals. So one thing to keep in mind is what a budget actually is. And ultimately, a budget is just a tool. Simply a tool. It's a tool that tracks what money is coming in over a specific period of time. So some people choose to budget daily, weekly, or monthly. A budget tracks what money is going out over that same specific period of time. So now you know what you're making over the month, what money is going out over the month. Your budget should track that. Whether it's fixed expenses, things like rent, gas, utilities, but also discretionary expenses that could vary month over month, like groceries, gas, birthday celebrations. A budget also tracks what savings or extra debt payments are happening over a specific period of time. So like I mentioned, your budget should show you what you can afford to put towards debt on top of your minimum payments, or what you can afford to put into savings. So your budget will track that information for you. And as your income changes, if it grows, that number should grow as well. And then lastly, it tracks what money is or is not left over at the end of a specific period of time. So if your expenses exceed your income within that month's time frame, your budget will show you that, and you got to make some changes. So I want you to know that it doesn't matter if you make a lot of money or a little bit of money. It doesn't matter if you have a lot of debt. We've all been there, and student loans included, we've all been there. doesn't matter if you don't have a dime in savings right now, or it doesn't matter if you've never been good with budgeting. You absolutely need a realistic budget for your situation. If you want to break through your budgeting barriers and really come on top of your financial goals, you absolutely need a realistic budget. So let me explain to you why you need a budget if you haven't got the gist of it just yet. You can't fix a problem you don't know you have. So if you have no form of budgeting right now, no system to track your income, to track your expenses, to track your spending, how do you know if you are overspending on going out to eat and fast food? How do you know that? How do you know if you are putting way too much into savings and not really thinking about what other expenses you have, and now you have to constantly tap into your savings? Your budget will answer that. Your budget will show you what problems you have, and then you can fix them. Now, another reason why you need a budget is financial clarity. So not only will a budget show you what problems you have, a budget will also make it very clear where you stand. And when you know where you stand, you can take action. You can make a change. You can do something different. You can really come out on top because now you know where you stand. It's only up from here, honey. Now, another reason why you need a budget is your budget is a key indicator of when you will reach your goals. So even if you have the most simplest budget in the world, what money is coming in, what money is going out, what money is left over, you can then figure out based on that leftover amount when you'll reach your savings goal. So let me give you an example. Let's say you make $5,000 a month. Keep it simple here. And your expenses are $4,000 a month, all of your expenses. That should mean you would have $1,000 left over each month. Well, now you can do something with that number. If your goal is to save $10,000, you know that realistically, you can reach that goal in 10 months. Boom, done. And that's not even counting looking at what those expenses are and trying to cut back. This is just plain facts. So your budget will tell you when you can reach your goals, and then you can use that information to make a positive change. And then lastly, you need a budget because you need that security. A budget will make you feel very secure and comfortable in knowing that your money is properly allocated to everything that it needs to be. Your expenses are covered, your bills are covered, your debts are covered, your savings is covered. You can take comfort and solace in knowing that's happening because your budget allows for it. It shows you that. Now, a realistic budget, again, keyword, emphasis, realistic, can change your life for the better. And I'm a true testament to that. I had no budget in California. I was doing whatever I wanted to do, and it was hurting me. I was accruing debt. I was spending more money than I had. I couldn't pay my rent. I was a mess. But the second I set up a realistic budget for myself, granted, my situation changed completely, but in conjunction with that realistic budget, I killed it. And the crazy thing is, had I budgeted earlier, I would not have been in the situation I was when I moved to Austin. I wouldn't have needed such a drastic lifestyle change to really get my life in order. But you know what? We can't think about the past. So whatever actions you made yesterday or a year's back, forget about it. It's done. How do we move forward from here? A realistic budget is how you move forward from here. So let's talk about what an effective realistic budget includes. And I want you to really take note here, because if your budget is missing any of these things, it may not work for you. And this could explain why your budget wasn't working in the past if you did not have any of these things. Number one, your consistent income. So your budget absolutely at minimum must include what money you have coming in over a consistent period of time. But you also want to consider inconsistent income. If you take odd jobs here and there, fine. You may not know exactly what or how much or when you'll earn, but you know that money is coming your way. Make a plan for what you will do with that inconsistent income. Make sure all of your numbers align with your regular income that comes consistently, but make a plan for what you'll do with that inconsistent income. Maybe it'll be an extra debt payment. Maybe it'll help save for your emergencies. Have a plan for it so when it does come, you don't go willy-nilly spending because you actually have a plan for it. Number 2, your consistent expenses and living costs. So like I mentioned earlier, this would be rent, electricity, your water and sewer bill, your gym membership, your Netflix subscription, all of those expenses that come out on a consistent basis for about the same amount each time. You want to make sure those are included in your budget. Number 3, and this is where most people forget, your inconsistent and discretionary expenses and spending. So you can't forget about those inconsistent expenses that don't happen every month, but they do pop up. You've got to remember those, because if you forget about them, when they do pop up and they're not budgeted for, everything goes to shambles, and that's not good. So you want to make sure your budget includes those inconsistent expenses. And if you don't know what they are, or maybe you forget, make a day of it, go through 1 year's worth of bank statements and credit card activity and find everything. You may even surprise yourself with some unused expenses or subscriptions that you can cancel and get rid of anyway. And then also discretionary spending. So like I had mentioned earlier with the mindset shift you need around budgeting, your budget should account for fun. Come on, life is too short to be so rigid with your money that you can't even treat yourself to a Starbucks once a week or once every other week. If you love Starbucks, budget for it in moderation, okay? I'm not saying all of your extra money needs to go to Starbucks, but what I'm saying is find $5 that you can give yourself a week to enjoy your iced latte. Me personally, I love iced coffees, and every weekend I go to the Barnes & Noble Cafe, do some City Girl savings work, write articles, whatever the case may be, and I treat myself to that iced coffee, and I feel good about it because it's budgeted for. I budget for it. I don't feel bad. I don't kick myself for spending money on something I enjoy because I know I can afford it. It's in my budget and it's in moderation. So you won't catch me going to get iced coffee every single day. That just wouldn't be realistic for my situation. But I do account for it, and you absolutely should account for the things that you love. Now, again, the key is moderation. If you have, let's say you have $500 left over after all of your inconsistent and consistent living expenses are covered, your groceries, gas, all of that is said and done, and you have $500 left over that could go towards debt and savings. Well, maybe give yourself 100 of that 500 for just you for the month. Whatever you want to do, you have $100 a month to go at it. And then the rest, the remaining 400, goes towards debt and savings. You are still making major progress, but you are also ensuring you don't kill yourself sticking to an unrealistic and ultimately demotivating budget. And then lastly, your budget must factor in savings and debt payments. So start with the bare minimums. Just start with the minimum debt payments. Make sure those are included in your consistent expenses. And then start with a very minimum savings amount. So remember, 36% of Americans aren't saving for retirement. Well, automatically factor 1% of your paycheck going to retirement. Just get it out of the way, factor it in. Now what do you have left? So the next time you create a budget or look back at your previous budget or move forward fresh from here, whatever the case may be. I want you to make sure that these 4 things are covered. If you do, you'll be in great shape. So let's talk about what you need for your budget to be an ultimate success. I want everyone, every woman, every man, anyone to have a budget that is successful, that they can follow, that helps them reach their goals, that gives them that financial clarity, that makes them feel good, knowing their money is allocated to things that it needs to be. So in order for your budget to be successful, your income must exceed your expenses and spending. If it doesn't, and this is a totally different conversation, but if it doesn't, you have 2 options. You can increase your income, however you got to do it, you increase your income, or you decrease your expenses and spending. So it was very clear when I was living in California that my expenses greatly exceeded my income. 1, because I was living paycheck to paycheck, and 2, because I couldn't pay my rent on time. Money was going out more than it was coming in. And I had to move states to get my life in order to really come out on top. I'm not saying it has to be that drastic, but you gotta do what you gotta do. If your income does not exceed your expenses and spending, you will never ever get ahead. So you gotta be real with yourself. You gotta do what it takes, and you gotta make sure that at very minimum, you are breaking even. And even breaking even can only take you so far. You'll be just fine, but you'll never get ahead. So number 2, in order for your budget to be successful, you must plan for those one-off and unexpected expenses. So we already talked about factoring in inconsistent expenses, which somewhat falls in here, but let's be real. What about one-off expenses that never come up before, but all of a sudden made their way to your life? Or something unexpected happens and now you need to fork out $100 when your budget is allocated to the T, all of your income. Well, the best way to do that is plan for it ahead of time. So what I do personally is I have a miscellaneous category in my budget. And basically $250 a month goes to an account just for miscellaneous expenses. Miscellaneous for me means one-off or unexpected expenses. So sometimes nothing comes up. Great. That money just accumulates over time. But when I do need it, it's there and my budget isn't hurting because of it. Okay. Number 3, in order for your budget to be successful, you must factor in saving for emergencies. So this can look different depending on your situation. If you have debt, and this is a question that most people ask, if you have debt, how much should you realistically have in savings? And in my experience, having at least $1,000 saved for emergencies before aggressively paying off debt is the best way to go. If you know that you would need a little bit more than that to cover an emergency, then go with that. But at minimum, you want to have at least $1,000 saved for emergencies, and then you can focus on paying off your debt. If you don't have debt, then at minimum, your emergency fund should be 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. So if you lost your job tomorrow, you know you would be covered for at least 3 to 6 months while you look for a new job. Because remember, your income's gotta exceed your spending. So after that 3 to 6 months, what are you gonna do? And then lastly, in order for your budget to be the best success it can be, you must track your spending. You must make sure you're actually following your budget. Most people think that the extent of their financial responsibility stops with the budget. They created this wonderful, realistic budget. It works for their situation. They pay off debt. They reach their goals, whatever the case may be. But they don't track to make sure they're following. And that's not good. With my one-on-one clients, what we do is we create a daily tracker that is in line with their budget. So whatever amount we have allocated to each category, we track on a daily basis to ensure that they're actually staying in the limits of that category. Whatever tracking looks like to you, everybody functions differently. Whatever it looks like to you, just do it. You've got to do something to make sure you're following your budget. And tracking, whether it's an app, an Excel spreadsheet, or writing it down, is the best way to go. Okay, so we talked about this before, and your income must exceed your expenses for your budget to be successful. But how can that happen? How your income can exceed your expenses is a few things. So pinpoint if your income can cover all of your living costs. So if you're looking at your budget and you clearly see that your income covers all of your consistent expenses but not the inconsistent ones, at least you know a specific amount that you need to increase your income by to ensure those inconsistent expenses are covered as well. One thing to help ensure your income exceeds your expenses, make sure discretionary spending is the first to go. I know I said that it's important to include fun in your budget, but if your income is not exceeding your expenses, the discretionary's got to go. The fun's got to go until you can bring in more money. You've got to be willing to sacrifice. This doesn't have to be long term, and you should not live life like that consistently, but that should be the first to go because you don't necessarily need it. You can look through past statements for spending patterns. If your income doesn't exceed your expenses, look and see where your money's going. Do you have a tendency to shop once a month? Or when a major sale comes your way, do you spend way more money than you should? Look through past statements and identify those spending triggers, and then knowing that information, make a change moving forward. And then obviously bring in more money every month to ensure your income exceeds your expenses. There's so many things you can do to make more money that doesn't include getting a second job, although that can definitely help. Just some ideas, ask for a raise. Imagine if you can get more money for the job you already do. If you haven't had a raise recently, it may be a good time to ask. You could start tutoring at the local community college, or if you are sharp and savvy in a specific subject, create videos and sell them online. You got to get creative here. Take surveys. Go start driving for Uber. You got to think outside the box, because bringing in more money is going to be your best bet to ensure your income always exceeds your expenses. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to plan for unexpected expenses. So you can do what I do, factor in a miscellaneous category into your monthly budget. Have a certain amount of money dedicated to those one-off expenses. And sometimes you may find that nothing comes up and you're good to go, or something comes up and it doesn't necessarily cover what's in your miscellaneous account, but at least it helps ease that burden. You might have to do some finagling around with your budget, but having money already set aside for that unexpected expense will make your life a lot easier. Create a close-by savings to cover small emergencies. So don't forget the rule of thumb. Having $1,000 handy just in case is your surefire way to go. And when I say close-by savings, ideally I mean a savings account that's linked to your checking. Now, this doesn't give you permission to just use that $1,000 for whatever you want because you ran out of money in your checking account. It's supposed to be there close by, because if something does pop up, you got it. It's right there. And then always too, remember the goal is to work up towards that 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. So once you become debt-free, it'll be a lot easier to hit that target mark. All of these things will make it so much easier for you to handle those one-off or unexpected expenses that pop up, because you're prepared for them as best you can be. Now let's talk about how to track your spending against your budget. I talked about this being a very, very important factor of a successful budget. So you can create a spreadsheet, which is what I do and what I do for my clients, or you can leverage an app like EveryDollar or Mint, which automatically tracks your spending based on what type of spending it is. I would suggest tracking every 1 to 3 days if you're doing it yourself via a spreadsheet or writing it down. If you go longer than that 3-day mark, it gets a little bit harder, a little bit more tedious, and it's easy for you to kind of forget. And once you stop tracking, you don't know if you're following your budget. And what's also good about tracking your spending against your budget is if you have a budget that's created for the month and you're tracking every day, now we're halfway through the month and you can see that you've clearly exceeded your food budget. You know, for the second half of the month, you got to keep it light. You know, your tracking will be very informative. It will show you where your money goes, and you can use that information to make changes and control your spending. And then you can use it to identify patterns to adjust your next month's budget, or the budget after that, the month after that, and the month after that. When you track your spending and keep tabs on it, you'll see patterns, you'll see trends. And once you know that information, you can make a change. So one thing I also want you to keep in mind is that your budget will never ever be 100% the same month over month, and that's totally fine. It can and will change, and you just have to grow and adjust with it. So let's recap what you learned today. You've learned that mindset is critical for following a budget. So no longer thinking a budget is this negative tool that will just ruin your life and make you miserable and you just can't do it because you have debt. No, 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 no. A budget will make your life so much better. You'll feel more comfortable and secure and knowledgeable about your situation. A budget is a good thing. Have positive mindset towards it. You also learn that a budget is simply an informational tool. It tells you what money's coming in, what money's going out, what's left over, if anything, and what's going to savings and debt. You learn what makes a budget realistic and successful. So just a quick reminder, you know, it has your budget factors in your consistent income, consistent expenses, inconsistent income, inconsistent expenses, your fun, your discretionary spending, your minimum debt payments and savings payments. And it's successful because you track against it. You make sure that you are following that budget by taking it up a notch and tracking your spending. And then you also learned how to make sure you are following your budget, and that's simply through tracking. It will get easier. The first month of tracking is always the hardest. You can ask my clients this, but as it becomes second nature and as the information becomes so powerful and impactful, it becomes a normal daily habit, a routine of your life. So if you've learned anything from this webinar, I hope it's that you know that you need a realistic budget for your situation. All right, everyone, that's the end. If you have questions, do not hesitate to reach out. citygirlsavings.com, all social media handles at citygirlsavings. I am here rooting for you. I am your budget coach. I am your budget queen. Whatever you need, you just reach out. All right, everyone, go create those successful budgets now that you know how, and I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.